Let's return to This Week in America. Here's your host, Rick Bratton.
Welcome back, everybody, coast to coast. This Week in America. Katherine V. Stevens is a poet, photographer, author, and retired high school teacher of English and history. Her historical fiction, Otto, a German soldier from the trenches of World War I to the Eisenstadt trials at Nuremberg, is receiving excellent reviews. Otto is a German farm lad who runs away to World War I at 16, is wounded before the end of the war, and believes in the very soil and soul of Germany. He follows the man who led him in trenches into the brown shirts and into the black garb of the Nazi SS, vowing to serve his country. He does what his country asks, following each command to the letter, and in the end cannot understand why his country is on trial. He believes it is all a sham, another victor's punishment like the Treaty of Versailles, until he learns that priests were sent to camps and his world collapses around him. Then Otto himself is on trial. Katherine Stevens, author of Otto, a German soldier from the trenches of World War I to the Eisenstadt trials at Nuremberg, is our guest on This Week in America. Katherine, welcome to the program. It is a delight to have you here.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your program.
I am looking forward to discussing this book, which is so well done, receiving rave reviews. I'll start with a little bit about you. Talk about your background, your credentials, and this has been something that is a history that has interested you all of your life.
Yes, it has. I have been a teacher most of my life, and the irony of it all is, of course, that when I was growing up, a teacher is one of those things that I would never be. But I got a BS in English and history at the University of Dubuque, and then went right into teaching and never looked back. I have taught both at traditional high schools and at experimental learning high schools. I have taught both English and history in both of those areas. I received my master's degree at the Breadloaf School of English in Middlebury, Vermont, and they put the English people all up in the mountains because the campus in the summer is all foreign language. I have won all kinds of awards for my teaching, but I'm most interested in doing the writing that I've been doing now. I have had some of my poetry published in a book called Nesting by Stars, and my first historical fiction novel was called Tux and Me, which was the story of Christmas addicts and a young Quaker boy from the early days of the Bank Act, the Stamp Act, and leading all the way to the Boston Tea Party. So historical fiction is something that's always been part of me because I think history is really not facts and wars and all of that sort of thing, but history is really the story of the average person. And I wrote the first book, Tux and Me, because I had students in my expeditionary learning class who didn't realize we'd ever had a Revolutionary War, if you can imagine.
Amazing.
And then, yes, they did not know that we'd ever had a Revolutionary War. And then I wrote Otto for a similar reason, that because they were some of those same students had heard all of the denial stories, and so we actually studied the Holocaust, and they found it really amazing, and then we're asking questions like why, and that got me started.
You know, it's such a fascinating story. The book is Otto by Katherine Stevens, our guest on the program. If you're Googling that, that's Stevens. Book available at stratton-press.com, all of the usual places. And you really make history come alive. Talk about that with the historical background, but making people that are relatable. I mean, we go through all these different emotions with Otto as he's going through it at the same time in what is his fictional real life.
Yes. Otto, by the time the book opens, Otto is in his 50s because he ran away to the First World War. And he's like trying to put all the things together as he attends this trial. The Nuremberg trials, as you know, put Germany on trial for war crimes especially against humanity. As we know, know they killed 6 million Jews, but a total of 10 million people in their camps altogether, homosexuals, Seventh-day Adventists. What Otto comes to realize is they also had in Dachau, that was a camp where they sent all the priests, and priests were forced to do all the same kind of labor and follow the same kind of starvation rules that everybody else did, all the other kinds of people that they had in those camps. And that was what blew him away, because even though he is not a religious man, he is SS to the core, but he can't understand how a priest could be someone who would damage a country. How saying that the SS weren't religious, which of course they weren't, how that could damage Germany. He could not understand that. And when he learned that, it sort of crushed his whole belief system in the SS and what they were all about. Because Otto believed he was, if you want to call the SS a cult, and perhaps that's what it really was, a cult of murder perhaps, but a cult nevertheless. He believed to his core every word. He believed Himmler that they were not cruel, although we know that a lot of cruelty went on.
Yes.
He believed that everything that he did, every person he killed, he was saving Germany from those people. Every child, every baby that was killed, he believed that he was saving Germany in doing that. He believed. And I think we could look at the world today and see people who believe in, other human beings in such a way that they would kill for that belief system,
Yes.
for that religion, for that person, that they would do anything for that person. And the only way out, perhaps, is to have that one event, that one thing that shatters whatever it is that holds them to that belief, and that's the only way to break them out of that system. And then what do you do when your belief is broken? What happens to you then? How do you live through that?
It's such a remarkable story, so well told. The book is Otto, a German soldier from the trenches of World War I to the Eisenstadt trials at Nuremberg by Katherine V. Stevens, our guest on the program. Book available at stratton-press.com. As you're working on historical fiction, talk about how your writing style, the writing process, what you went through to sort of take yourself back to that time period. I would almost think as you're doing this, you almost feel like you're living back during this period.
And you have to. I think you have to suspend yourself. I think that just as a good reader has to suspend who they are to enter a book and to really absorb the book, I think you have to do that when you're doing the research. You have to suspend what you believe about a period and actually read what the various historians have said about the period, and not just from one side. You have to look at what people have said and take it from all different perspectives. For example, you have to read the soldiers who walked into the camps and liberated them. You have to read their point of views. You also have to read, for example, what Patton said, because his point of view was, now that we have conquered Germany, we have to find a way to rule it. And it's easy to say, let no Nazis be in any kind of position of control, but they're the only ones who knew how to run the country. So you have to balance all of those things. It's one thing to say, we are the victors, and so, yes, we will have revenge on the country and not let any food come into them, let them starve like the rest of Europe starved, and then on the other hand realize that we can't let, a whole country starve to death forever, that
Yes.
At some point we have to relieve the revenge. And then you find out all of these other little things, like if you were one of the characters that just magically pops up, and I don't know where these characters come from. When you're writing a book, you start out with a certain few characters in your mind, and then the side characters all just magically appear. One of the side characters happens to be a young woman, and she is one of those who submits the names of the people who are to be sterilized because they are imbeciles, according to an IQ definition. And you have to I think the writer at some point, because she has to, after the war is over and she attends the trial, she has to ask herself, if I were to do it again, would I give these names up, knowing what's going to happen to these men and women? You have to ask yourself as a reader, would I follow the orders? Would I submit all these names so that these people would to be sterilized just because their IQ isn't at a certain point? Would I pick and choose who I sent? Would I send only the ones with the very worst IQ so that they weren't reproducing? Is that, is that my role? What is my moral, role in this world? Do I really believe that only people of a certain IQ should be allowed to have children? All of these questions that you really need to ask yourselves that really question who you are as a human being. The people of Germany had to ask themselves after the war. They either had to ask themselves and come to grips with it or hide it forever. And some people did one or the other. But it's a question that we still have to ask ourselves, because things like this have happened in our country. In fact, some people would make the claim that the Germans learned everything about eugenics and about sterilization and about euthanasia from our country before the war ever happened.
As you read the book, it really gets you thinking. It's pretty easy to say, I don't know why somebody would follow somebody else. I don't know why somebody would do that. And then when you're in Otto's head, suddenly you start thinking, wow, what would I do in that set of circumstances? The book is Otto. The author is Katherine Stevens, our guest on the program. Book available at stratton-press.com. Let's talk a little bit about the writing process. When you get the background, let's talk about the background first of all. How long did it take for you to do the research? And I understand you became familiar with the Holocaust back when you were a young girl. So this was basically something as a young woman that you'd been thinking about.
Yes. My dad was in the Merchant Marines, and, they were the ones that were not really in the military but went along on all of these ships to help protect our merchant fleet that was taking goods. And he was at the Battle of Murmansk, where we were taking supplies to the White Russians. That was before all the communism and everything took over in Russia, and while Russia was still on our side during the Second World War. At any rate, after that, Canada began showing all of these films, and we lived in the Detroit, Michigan area then. Canada began showing all these films called Victory at Sea, and my dad was really interested in those. And then eventually Hollywood began taking all of the film that the military had taken during the war and began turning those into film clips that were shown on Sunday afternoons, and we watched all of those. Now, I was probably 10 or 11 by the time that these were being shown, and so I watched all of those, and I watched the movies about the camps and about liberating the camps, and all of the real military battles that went on. So it was like World War II was in my veins. And then as a young girl, I read all of the books by Leon Uris, and he wrote numerous books about the Holocaust. When I was in high school, we actually had Holocaust survivors come into our classrooms and talk. And then as a teacher, I had them come into my classrooms and talk. And so it was something that has been like a part of me since I was a very young person. And when I keep hearing all of these and have students in my classroom who just can't believe that anyone ever did anything like that, or that there were that many people involved. And I've always wondered the why and the how and that sort of thing. And I just felt like I had to do something about it. And so I began reading. And my son teaches at East Carolina State University in North Carolina. And so I would go and spend, maybe a month at his house in the summer. And I would just sit in the library. I would go to school with him every day. And I would just sit in the library all day, every day for a month. And just start at the Holocaust shelf and just read everything on that shelf, and then that would lead me to other shelves and with associated things. And so it was really interesting to see all the ramifications, not only the Holocaust, but all of the things about making the right choices, and the people who knew and who didn't act, and the people who knew and did act, and it's just a fascinating area.
When you get all of that research compiled and you feel like I've got enough here that I can tell my story, at that point, does the main character develop, or were you sort of formulating an Otto in your mind as you were doing the research?
Well, I had a character in my mind. I didn't know all of what it was going to be, but I knew that I had to tell the story through a person, and I wanted it to be a relatively innocent person. And at some point, being on a farm seemed to be the most reasonable thing. And then the more research I did, I knew he had to be from Bavaria. And don't tell me why. I just knew that I didn't want him from Prussia, because I don't want that the whole military thing in there. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. And then, as I said, as you meet, and then I needed him to have friends that would represent the different political viewpoints, because I was going to bring priests in later. I needed to have a Catholic in the dugout with him. I needed to have somebody who knew Hitler, and Hitler was part of this list resident Bavarian regiment, and so my guy Otto had to be part of that, and so that sort of thing just kind of happens. But then the side characters, I don't know where they come from. There really is a muse out there that these characters come in, but somebody has to be there at that particular time, and then the character just develops from there. So it's an interesting process. Some of it you really do create, and some of it, the gods bring into your writing.
It's amazing you hear that so often from authors that are telling the story and it goes in a different way or introduces something different than they had originally planned on. It's like I've got a voice telling me, or the characters are telling me to go in this direction, and I take the story in that direction. Otto is the name of the book. Katherine Stevens is the author and our guest on the program. Time going by so quickly, so much to talk about, a book so well done. Why did you choose the subject matter, the Holocaust in Eisenstadt?
That's, when you're going to write about the Holocaust, that is a tricky thing. I could not, in any sense of the word, have a hero come out of the camps. I just could not. I couldn't find any way to have somebody come out of the camps and be redeemed. And I desperately needed, for my own mental health, to have my character be redeemed, like Otto is in the end. For all the shooting and killing that he does, he is able to come out of the end of it as a whole person. I couldn't see how anybody could come out of the camps that way. I just could not. I could not see myself writing about the camps, because I couldn't see how there could be anything but cruelty in the camps. So that limited what I could write about. I knew some and had read several first-hand accounts of the killing in Latvia and Lithuania, but mostly in Lithuania. And I had known some people when I was working in Detroit. I had known some people there who actually were Lithuanians, and had found themselves in some really awful situations. And so I had a little bit of their side of the story, and so I could write about that, and about the corruption in the German forces and the people who took, because they were taking clothing they were stripping everybody down before they shot them, and that all of that stuff was supposed to come back to Germany, and some people just helped themselves to what they wanted and sent to Germany what they didn't want. Otto, of course, would never do that because he was a purist, but at any rate, that helped me focus in on the area that I wanted to focus in on, and it had the least amount of cruelty that was just unexplainable. Yes, so I could deal with that.
A fascinating book. Otto, the book's available, stratton-press.com, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all of the usual places. All this information on a website, thisweekinamerica.us. It's just a remarkable story to follow Otto and what he goes through, the transformation he goes through, and suddenly finds himself on trial and going back and looking at all of the atrocities that he was complicit to years before. Does the book have a meaning today? You've mentioned a couple of times that you can understand sort of, we see it today, where people just are true believers. They're following somebody because they are true believers. What's the impact this book has on what's happening today?
Well, I can only hope that some people, and I hate to get too political, so I'm going to try very hard not to, because to me it just really is the people who are following Himmler and who really believe in him are following somebody else today, in my opinion, and with some of the same negative responses in the world, and it just really hurts my soul. To see that happening, but we don't even have to look at today. We can look, a few years ago, the whole Jim Jones thing, where people drank the Kool-Aid, and literally died because they believed in what this man was telling them. I mean, it's just so sad that you can believe an Ayatollah, let's say, so strongly that you're willing to die and have your children die, But to me, it goes back so much further in history. It's like from the beginning, we have had to have, maybe when we want to go back to even the Bible, the early Bible days, the idea of a scapegoat, that we have to put all of our sins or everything that is wrong with the world on the scapegoat and send him into the wilderness, or in the South American Aztec days, where we would sacrifice our children so our harvest would be good, or we would kill virgins so that our fruits would, or our crops would be fruitful. It's like we have to find someone negative to blame. And the Jews were very easy to blame because they were the ones that lent money. And you know that if you have to borrow money from somebody, you kind of avoid them because, that means you got to pay them back.
Yes.
And so it's easy to hate somebody, and it's easy to blame somebody, and it's like the immigrants in our country, the first set of immigrants were, I think, the Germans. They were the bad guys. And then the next immigrants that came along were the Irish, and they were the bad guys. And now it's the Latin Americans, and they are the bad guys, And the blacks have always been the bad guys because they're the wrong color. And it's like we can't face up to the realities of the world without blaming somebody. And the Germans just took it to an nth degree, and the glory of their country for a few years, and hopefully they will get back to that glory soon, was they turned it all around and they became the most free-loving, the most giving, the most anti-Semitism people in the world. We wouldn't take a ship. There was a ship that left from Germany full of men, women, and children, and it was supposed to land in South America, and they wouldn't let it land. It tried to land 3 times in America and once in Canada, and it didn't land. And finally, the only place they could go was back to Germany, where they immediately went to camps and were killed. And to me, that's just like Hitler said, nobody wants them, so why are they angry that we're killing them? And it's, and that was sort of like a bottom line that everybody could look to, and the whole world should have been ashamed of.
A few minutes.
Wasn't.
Yes, and you've said a couple minutes left in the program. I have no idea where the time is going, but it's gone by quickly. You've said that good writing needs to take us somewhere, teach us something about ourselves. And in all of your books, that's what you do, and Otto is no different. We really learn something about people and possibly ourselves, don't we?
Yes, if it's written well, that's what happens, and I hope Otto does that.
Well, it has done that, and it's a very enlightening book. It's a remarkable story. Once you pick it up, it's difficult to put down to see how a mind like that operates, and the sense when he realizes what he's done has been wrong. Katherine, what do you hope that we do take away from reading Otto? And it's probably hard to summarize that in less than 8,000 words because there's so much there that we learn in the story. But what do you hope the takeaway is for the average reader in reading Otto?
The story of history is the story of us, and the way we treat each other will determine what the history of our world is going to be. And the only way to treat each other is with love. And, the guy who came to tell us that, we crucified. So I hope we don't keep crucifying each other, from now on, but we learn the lesson of love.
And in the end, Otto has to face what he has done. And that's a message for all of us, no matter what the motivation is, why you think you're doing something and the cause is noble. In the end, you have to face exactly what you've done. The book is Otto. Take a minute or so here at the end. What are you working on now? It's you've done such a remarkable job in bringing history alive with people that are relatable, and we learn something after reading your books. What are you working on now?
Well, it's something totally different. I'm working on a book I'm calling I, John, and it's the years that the Virgin Mary spent with John the Apostle. All those years after Jesus on the cross gave John to his mother to John, and all those years they spent together, and the things that they experienced together, and the things that John learned from being with Mary. He was the longest living apostle and lived almost 100 years, and so that's where I'm going next.
Looking forward to reading that and hopefully having a chance to talk about that. The book by Katherine Stevens is Otto, a German soldier from the trenches of World War I to the Eisenstadt trials at Nuremberg. Book available, stratton-press.com, the publisher. You'll find it Amazon, of course, all of the usual places. Katherine, excellent job with this book. It's receiving rave reviews and very deserving of those reviews. Excellent job. Thank you for being with us on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
It has been our pleasure. It's Katherine Stevens, author of the book Otto. You'll find it wherever books are sold. Send you to stratton-press.com. And, of course, information on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. We're back on today's program after these messages.
This Week in America is online. You can visit our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Scott Pinkerton, associate producer of This Week in America. Jay Anderson, segment producer. Ben Watson, webmaster. Otto Bechet, director of engineering and TV production. This Week in America produced and is a trademark of Blue Funk Broadcasting, LLC. For information on all of our guests and to listen to this week's show, our website again at thisweekinamerica.us. And I'm Sean Bratton, executive producer of This Week in America.